Mumbai, even I was talking to one of the taxi drivers and one of them asked me, भैया आप कोई स्टॉक रेकमेंड करोगे? आपका कॉल सुना कि आप स्टॉक्स वगैरह में कुछ इन्वेस्ट करते हो. This is like a shift which is happening.
A colleague of mine were in a taxi ride a month ago, and taxi driver के left the laptop था. As he was driving, he was doing F&O trading. तो हम पूछे कि आपको टेंशन नहीं होता? लेकिन कमाई तो उसी में है, टैक्सी ड्राइवर में कौन से पैसे हैं?
Right? Filings है 80 million, but only 20 million people are paying income tax. And remember, to pay income tax, the threshold is I think 6 lakh, right? 6 lakhs of income. So it's a very strange situation where only 20 million Indians supposedly have 6 lakhs and more of income. And yet we have 170 million Indians trading in the market.
You mentioned about how India's significant wealth lies in real estate. How do you see the small and medium REITs, which SEBI has now regulated, impacting the overall investment space?
You also mentioned in your book that there are decades when nothing happens and there are weeks where decades happens. Why do you say so?
Mumbai has the most number of billionaires in the world, barring एक ही शहर about 11. एक शहर पल्सन नहीं रहा. At independence, when the British left us, our per capita income was half of that of East Asia. So we left as a deeply impoverished nation. They would just see people dying on the pavement of hunger. भूखे मर जाते थे सड़क पे. 60s के दशक की बात कर रहा हूँ. Not talking about pre-independence, right?
If you were the Prime Minister of India, what are some 3 changes you would like to do in the Indian economy?
I usually do a lot of rhymes and I'm a big fan of poems, by the way. So we have like a very short and crisp rhyme for our guest today. And here it goes. I hope you all will enjoy this. He is a voracious reader and I guess never likes resting. He identifies high quality companies mentioned in KwK and investing. In markets, there are 2 kinds of people, bulls and bears. You'll find stories of all these people in The Unusual Billionaires. When you're working with him, having a knack of numbers is a must. He is the most celebrated investor and is a diamond in the dust. Saying no to my podcast invites, hopefully he'll never reject. Power of systems and discipline is what I have learned from the Victory Project. He is one of the best persons to pick stocks, I swear. And a pair of relaxo slippers is what he'll always wear. What you and I can't predict is what he can see. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Saurabh Mukherjea.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege being here. And I must say that the reason I agreed to do this with Kushal is at the height of COVID, that I think we've given up on many things such as seeing other people. At the height of COVID, he reached out for a podcast, and at that time, we were really struggling. I think personally, we were dealing with a lot of tensions within the firm, within the family, business-wise as well. At the height of COVID, we couldn't open our offices, and it was a struggle getting assets under management moving. And that optimism that he infused into our life was it Kushal December 21, November, December 21, right? Second wave के बाद जब पिट चुके थे. That podcast with Kushal, sort of gave me a new sort of reason to believe, new optimism to believe that youngsters like him will define India's future. And from that day onwards, whenever he reaches out, I've almost seen it as an inflection point in my story, in the country's story, a podcast with Kushal. And, as we discussed, this is a novel format. So congratulations for creating a format where it's a podcast, right? But it's live with live audience. Thank you so much, folks, for being here. Thank you, Kushal.
So thanks once again. We also have Nandita, who works at Marcellus Investment Managers, and both of them have written this amazing book called Behold the Leviathan. And trust me, when I say this, I mean it completely. I read this book in 3 readings itself, although I usually take 6, 7 readings or 10 readings, that's my normal. But you will get like a lot of insights about the entire Indian economy. And my favorite chapter was the rise of India's new elite, which we discussed in our podcast and conversation as well. My first question to you on a lighter note is that you've written 7 books in the last 9 years, which is almost close to 1 book per year. And you also manage close to $1 billion in assets under management at Marcellus Investment Managers. So how many hours do you have in a day?
I wish the day had 20 hours. But that being said, as you notice, right, and everybody I'm sure has noticed that all my books have co-authors. The reason that works is the co-author does all the work. So in this case, Nandita did all the work, and my job honestly is to work with really bright people, give them ideas, and then help them shape the ideas. So in the case of Behold the Leviathan, I think Nandita put in 2 years of solid number crunching. Right, for every chart you see in the book, there were 80 charts that were discarded. Right, for every conclusion you see in the book, there were a dozen other conclusions that were discarded. And that process of working with hardworking, bright people, and I've worked with much the same set of people for the last 2 decades. So, for example, I got Introductory, who was my co-author in 2 books ago, Diamonds in the Dust, and actually was also the co-author on KwK and Invest Introductory, and I've been working together for 20 years now. Salil, who was a co-author in Diamonds in the Dust, I've known as a client for many years, and now for 6 years has been a colleague. And once you work with a group of people for many years, right, you could finish each other's sentences. Now, the reason it's very useful for me is Nandita can now finish my sentences. I just have to stand at the security line in the airport queue. We're on, say, 200 flights a year. So airport queue while boarding the plane, I'll say, let's think this through. And by the time we get off the flight, she would have written a part of that analysis, right? So that's how we work. It makes for a very tightly packed day, but it makes for a fun life, and it gives us a chance to meet people, bright young people from all walks of life. And honestly, these sorts of interactions wouldn't be feasible. Getting to know people like you, Kushal, would be feasible if we weren't writing. So writing is a little bit of work, but courtesy of bright youngsters like Nandita, they do the work. I get the privilege of printing all of it.
Nandita, how many times it has happened that you went in a flight with Saurabh and a lot of people have recognized him?
It almost happens every day. So just yesterday we were traveling back from Delhi, and the flight was a bit descent. It was getting down to Mumbai, and the air hostess was saying that please sit down on your seat and tie on your seat belts. And there's this one gentleman who just walks up and says, "Sir, are you Saurabh Mukherjea? Can I take a selfie with you?" So it happens way too many times.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And I remember sort of you having a conversation in our last podcast, and you had mentioned that whenever you travel and you take 200 flights in a year, you also write a lot while you are travel, and most of the writing happens when you are traveling. So that is how you also manage your time, and which is why we get so much wisdom from you through the books that you have written. One of the main things that you've written in the book, which also caught my attention, was that 95% of the Indian household savings are in physical assets, which was also mentioned in the report by RBI, gold, real estate and land. However, if you see the number of demat accounts have grown 10 times in the last decade to 16 crores, 160 million. And the number of mutual fund folios have also grown 3.5 times in the past decade to 145 million, which is 14.5 crores. So the question here is that how will this 95% number change going forward according to you, especially after more awareness on investing, SIPs, mutual funds is coming along and financial assets are taking place?
I think there's 2 dimensions to it. I think this is a very interesting subject. It's perhaps the most important subject in India today. And I think we'll try to explain to you what I think is an opportunity, but I'll also explain to you what I think is a real challenge in the country today. So let's start with the demat account number at 170 million as per SEBI, right? It's gone up 4x in 4 years. Keep in mind that only 20 million people are paying income tax, right? Filings hai 80 million, but only 20 million people are paying income tax. And remember, to pay income tax, the threshold is I think 6 lakh, right? 6 lakh is the 6 lakhs of income. So it's a very strange situation where only 20 million Indians supposedly have 6 lakhs and more of income, and yet we have 170 million Indians trading in the market, right? And it's a strange situation. It has worrying aspects. So for example, I think last week, the SEBI whole-time director, Bhatia Saab, he said that the fact that we have the world's highest F&O volume is not something to be particularly proud of, right? I think there's something very worrisome which has happened in the financial system. SEBI itself published data 2 weeks ago showing that the most of the trading is not taking place in affluent cities. South India, for example, South Indians are not punting their brains out of the stock market. SEBI showed that it's not even rich cities like Bombay, Delhi, where most of the trading is taking place. It's taking place in relatively poor towns in North India, and even in those towns, it's not the rich people who are trading. It's basically low-income young men in North India who are trading, and they seem to be trading these ginormous sums of money, which is why F&O volumes make we are with the world's leader, even though these men probably have very little by way of income, right? So it's a very strange situation. That's the pehla aspect, the number of demat accounts, 4x growth, not supported by any rational data or any rational analysis of the economy, and worrisome level of volumes where the regulator themselves is not. The regulator itself is how very worried about this. Now let's look at the MF flows data, right? So if you take data for 9 months to September, mutual fund inflows data and annualize that, this year, this calendar year, India will do roughly something like $70 billion of net inflows into the stock market, right? Numbers that we've never done before. Numbers that any emerging market has ever done. $70 billion. And remember, this is coming at a time where FMCG volumes are barely growing, whether it's Unilever, whether it is Tata Consumer, whether it is Dabur reporting very weak FMCG volume growth. Two-wheeler sales are also flattish. Passenger vehicle sales actually declining. Cement volumes are barely growing 3%. And most interestingly, banks are having trouble getting deposits. That's very strange. Like if you have $70 billion, $75 billion coming into the mutual fund ecosystem, it is very, very strange that banks are having trouble getting deposits, right? So this is the second aspect of India, which some people are celebrating, but I think it's a deeply worrisome construct. And remember, in all this, private capex is barely growing. So if people have such animal spirits, कि दबा के मार्केट में पैसा लगाना है, but they're not investing in their own business, right? So I think they're in a very interesting juncture. Inflection point में है. The data sets are very, very, very strange, and I think we're at a very interesting inflection point. Now let's take through आगे सोचते हैं, right? We have roughly Hindustan with 500 million households. There are 300 million households. 300 million households in India. Okay. If you read Saurabh Mukherjea's latest book, Rama's latest book is called Lilliput Land. Outstanding kitab hai, padhiyega. Lilliput Land, right? Page after page of brilliant analysis. The tables and charts in that book, Kushal, are I think worth spending, I think, a whole week reading that book piece. So what she's done, what she's shown very convincingly, and several other people have done it, I think Rama has done it most convincingly. This shows that our country has barely 30 million families who actually have money. Okay? Out of the 300 million families, which is the superset, 30 million ke paas paisa hai. 20 million pay income tax, that also squares up, right? Now, if both the number of MF folios and the number of demat accounts have far exceeded 30 million, then I think there's serious ramifications for those who aspire to build businesses in our industry, right? Because 30 million families ke paas paisa hai, right? And the analysis is very convincing. A range of other people have given us the same figure. But 6x that have MF folios or 6x that have demat accounts, I think that has serious ramifications for growth opportunities. So data in India is actually widely available. It's just the ability to look at that rationally and say, opportunity kidhar hai, samajhna hai, right? Now let me spin it the other way. What Nandita showed in the book, this is the chapter on the new elite, both her work using government tax data and work done by management consultants such as BCG, suggests that out of that 30 million, somewhere between 300,000 to 1 million, 300,000 to 1 million are super rich families. Right? So 30 million is the middle class, a lot, out of which
1 million individuals, so around 250,000 families.
So 1 million individuals, so let's make it 30 million se 300,000 families now then. 30 million families have enough data, enough wealth, money, income, we constitute the middle class. But usme se keval 300,000 are super rich. The opportunity here becomes colossal. Right? Now, देखो game कितना interesting है. 30 million level pe I don't think it's a very interesting game, because I think that piece is potentially fairly tapped out. But at the 300,000 family level, which is the kind of ecosystem that the wealth managers the wealth managers are tapping into. There it's insanely interesting. Our reckoning is these families have something like 80-90% of India's wealth. Right? Now, in this constituency, which has 80-90% of India's wealth, land and gold is a big part of the game. And this is where the most rapid financialization will happen. Right? Our super rich are setting up, as I'm sure you would have heard, our super rich are setting up family offices. Some of them are doing it in-house, some of them are outsourcing it to third parties. They're setting up family offices in Dubai, Singapore, and it's I find very intriguing. LRS के लिमिट के तहत तो $250,000 है, तो वो काम कैसे वहाँ पे पहुँच रहा है पैसा is a intriguing सवाल. But anyway, अच्छी बातें कर रहे हैं, right? That's where I think the financialization will be very deep. The super rich are still heavily invested in physical assets. If they have a listed company, they own 60-70% of the listed company, and from both an asset diversification perspective and from a succession planning perspective. As the super rich, as the generations proceed, right? Family में सब बच्चों को interest नहीं होगा in the listed business. So naturally there'll be the wealthy family will sell down their stakes. That will give them money, which they will then need to monetize. So the super rich, I think, will be the big opportunity of the next decade, as opposed to the 30 million middle class, where the rapid growth in mutual fund folios and demat accounts suggest the middle class opportunity to a significant extent potentially is already tapped out.
So in this case, like the 95% number which is there, and if these HNI families are like the 250,000, 300,000 families, so here are we like going to see a shift in financial assets also, and which is why 95 get down to 85 or 80, or this 95 will just down to 93, 92, and it will like like this.
There's a shift. Why? The main reason for the shift is financial assets give you better compounding than physical assets, right? So, real estate, NCR real estate, Mumbai real estate, take gold. Typically, any physical asset will give you inflation plus a couple of percent in a fast-growing country. If it's a slow-growing country, UK jaisa, so even that becomes questionable. But in a fast-growing country, physical assets will give you inflation plus 2%. Usse zyada, by definition, physical asset cannot sustain more than that, right? If property surge more than that, nobody will open office, right? So supply-demand naturally equilibrates. So if you're a family with, say, $100 million of wealth, right? And many of those 300,000 families, Nandita's reference, the 300,000 families that all the private banks are running after, there are many of those families with $100 million of wealth. You typically have $10-20 million in financial assets, 80% in physical. And for several reasons, one of them being compounding, one of them being, as you go through generations, the number of kids will proliferate, you will have to financialize, right? And that is what, in a way, Royal Parel or Bombay does. The wealthy family is told, ये property बेचो, ये shares बेचो, the property बेचो, ये company के shares बेचो, and then, let's invest in Indian equities, overseas equities. There's very good reason. We've explained in several podcasts that most wealthy families in our country should have 40-50% of their wealth in North American assets, because North America compounds just as fast as India, but the volatility of that market is lower. And most importantly, and very intriguingly, the correlation between the Indian and US market, the correlation between the Indian and the US stock market is a mere 0.2. It's very, very rare that the two best performing stock markets in the world have very little correlation. Right? This is important to know, because if you can get two high performing assets, India ka market or US ka market, or unka correlation keval 0.2 hai, that means when the lights go out here, it might still be shining over there. So in simple terms, if our election hota hai, their election at a different time. So unka election hota hai, hamara election nahi hoga. When we go through a deep recession, they might not go through one, vice versa. When our banking system hits their pocket, theirs might not, right? So by combining India and North America, Indian families, I think, will create stable, high compounding portfolios, which will then allow them to generate wealth for your future generations. Ye to done hai. The high net worth piece, the wealth management piece, the private bank piece, I think there's a lot of visibility that will keep rocking. Now, this creates a challenge, right? Because if the richest families compound faster than the middle class families, because the richest families access the best opportunities in the world. And my reading is the world's best VCs will come to India to raise money in the next few years. Right? They've realized, the world's best VCs have realized that India is a huge opportunity for both to raise money for taking money from India and investing in America, but also to take Indian money and invest in Indian venture capital, right? So the richest families, the richest 300,000, compound faster than the middle class, where the disparity grows further, right? The disparity grows further, which is why I think you will see that capital gains tax will become a super hot potato in the next 10 years. Because it will become very apparent. I mean, unless somebody is blind, they can already see it, that the rich are pulling away. The rich are pulling away rapidly from the rest of the country. I'm not even talking about the working class. I'm not talking about the folks who cook for us and drive for us. Unka the story different hai, much tougher hai. I'm talking about the middle class, people who work in, a banking job or a IT job, right? Normal middle class जो साल में 20-30-40 लाख कमाता है, उसके financial outcomes and the super rich के financial outcomes, a massive disparity आ गया है. And that's going to exacerbate as the years go by. So the financialization opportunity, Kushal, I think is fundamentally that super rich 300,000. I'm not so sure the middle class. There will be incremental growth in the middle class as well. The market compounds at 13-14%, right? And the market compounds at 13-14%. The middle class financial assets will also grow, at least at somewhere around low double digits. But I think with the super rich, I think you're looking at their wealth assets. The super rich, I think you're looking at their wealth assets growing at 25-30%, roughly 10x in 10 years potentially. And that's where deeper pools of capital will come into the market, to the point where I think, as we've already seen, foreign investors are almost rendered. To the point where foreign investors are almost rendered irrelevant. And that makes sense. If we have the world's richest, by the way, Mumbai has the most number of billionaires in the world, barring एक ही शहर है, बॉम्बे के आगे. तो एक शहर कौन सा है? न्यूयॉर्क. After New York, the most number of billionaires हमारे संग की है बॉम्बे में. Right? So naturally, why do we need foreign investors? Was it the world's most number of billionaires in the world are living amongst us in Mumbai, right? Having vada pav. When उसको हमारे से आगे से न्यूयॉर्क ही है, so ये लोग भी हमारे साथ ही है. So they're gonna drive financialization, they're gonna drive the venture capital ecosystem, they're gonna drive private equity, and the big brand names from New York and Silicon Valley already have set up shop. Whoever hasn't come, I think will come in the next few months.
So you also mentioned in your book that there's this beautiful quote also, which says that there are decades when nothing happens and there are weeks where decades happens. And you mentioned that in the first few decades post-independence in India, nothing happened as such. But in the 21st century, India is beginning to make up for those difficult decades. So why do you say so, and could you elaborate on this?
So look, I grew up in the 80s when thankfully something was happening. But then as I grew older, right, and I realized what our country had gone through. So just to put it in very simple terms, and we've explained this in the book. We explained there's a chapter in India's economic history. Basically, the British left us deeply impoverished, right? It's only when we were writing this book, only when we were writing chapter 3, I realized how impoverished the British left us. So I didn't know till we did the research for the book that at independence, our per capita income was half of that of East Asia. So even in 47, when the British left us, they left us with only half the per capita income that the Chinese or the Koreans or the Malaysians had, right? Now, we weren't able to get to the bottom of why is it that हमको इतना impoverished किया. They were also, the East Asian countries were also British colonies. But for some reason, they were not looted to the extent we were looted, right? So we were basically left as a deeply impoverished nation. Even in the 60s, we've said in the book, in the 60s, we had 2 famines. Imagine, 2 famines. So I remember my dad telling me as I was growing up, that when he was growing up in Kolkata in the 60s, he told me that year after year, they would just see people dying on the pavement of hunger. भूखे मर जाते थे सड़क पे. 60s की दशक की बात कर रहा हूँ, not talking about pre-independence, right? 40s में Bengal famine हुआ, one of the largest famines ever, right? But 60s also we had famines. We couldn't feed ourselves. America used to give us free food and patronize us because we were bhikaris. taking free food for them, right? If you guys haven't done it, it's worth doing. YouTube mein jaiye, watch a test match from the 60s. 60s, unfortunately, all the YouTube matches I watched are in black and white. But early 70s ke test matches between India and England are in color. Watch them because it's incredible to watch. You see the big, brawny Englishmen. और हमारे बंदे राइट पेंसिल स्लिम राइट मतलब देख के लग रहा है बंदे को थप्पड़ मारो वहीं पे वो गिर जाएगा राइट ऑब्वियसली द फेलो हैज नेवर बीन टू अ जिम ही हैज नेवर हैड एनी प्रोटीन इन हिज लाइफ राइट बट बंदे के पास पैसे ही नहीं है राइट एंड इट्स इनक्रेडिबल वी आर स्टिल विनिंग सो 1971 बाय द वे इंडिया बीट इंग्लैंड फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम इन अ टेस्ट मैच इन ओवल भगवान चंद्रशेखर वाज द मैच विनर एंड ही हैड पोलियो इन हिज राइट आर्म right and because he had polio in his right arm he could twist his right arm in a way that the leg break was even more vicious than a normal leg break, right? So imagine this crazy man. You're winning a test match in England and you watch that test match. You can watch it on YouTube, right? You can watch that. Just see the physique of our players. They've barely been fed, right? And if you read up on that decade, 70s, even 80s, even 1988, I remember, the Indian cricket team went to New Zealand for a test match. उनकी वॉलेट चोरी हो गई. They had so little money that they went to McDonald's to eat. Right, 88 की बात कर रहा हूँ. Right, after we won the World Cup, we have so little money that our cricketers are eating at McDonald's. And remember, उसके बाद वो टेस्ट मैच खेलेगा बंदा बर्गर खा के. Right, so this was our state. Right, it's only in the 80s that we managed to put a little bit of savings together. 80s is the time India starts savings probably. Right, so 80s is when the stock market starts moving. Naturally, when households start saving and the stock market starts moving, first proper bull run in India was the 80s. In fact, the best compounding in Indian stock market was the 80s. I think in stock market का क्या 80s के दशक में मेरी किताब में है chapter 3 में stock market का क्या 80s के दशक में कुछ 24-25% था. Market itself took off, households started savings, and folks like Dhirubhai Ambani took those savings and built Reliance Industries. That's when India starts moving. धीरे धीरे World Cup, we won it in 84, hosted it in 87. Stock market started moving. First bout of liberalization, but it's still very early because it was still a desperately poor country, right? Now you come to the current day. Whilst we made the leap from the GDP का leap करने था 2 trillion to 3 trillion, थोड़ा contextualize करते लोगों के लिए.
Yeah, so actually we are one of the fastest nations who have shifted from 2 trillion to becoming a 3 trillion economy. The fastest obviously is China, which went from 2 trillion to 3 trillion within a span of 2 years. So from 2004 to 2006 they made that jump. China was the fastest. US and Japan were the next. They did it in 3 to 4 years. India is the fifth one, which did it in 5 years. So we, in a matter of 5 years, we've jumped from 2 trillion to 3 trillion.
ठीक है. Now, we're not a command and control economy. This is economy. This is not stock market. The stock market, how believable it is a bit difficult to. Our last thing is hard to understand. This is in the economy. Now, even after all this, our per capita income today is half of that of Sri Lanka. Half of Sri Lanka. 1/3 of Thailand. 1/5 of China, 1/30th that of the United States. There are 190 nations in the world. We're in the 50 poorest nations in the world, right? So we've come a long way. The motor has started moving, right? Which is why when people get pessimistic on India, मेरे को थोड़ा irrational लगता है. Because I don't think people who get pessimistic on India, especially friends and relatives who live abroad, when they get pessimistic on India, I don't think they understand what levels of desperate poverty we've climbed out from. Now, an Indian can say, not my problem was मैं तो Silicon Valley में फोड़ रहा हूँ, तुम भूखे मरो बॉम्बे में मेरे को क्या करना है? But if you want to see life like that, then there's no point having this discussion, right? If we believe this is our country, then this is our problem to solve, right? So if you look at East Asia versus India, we were half of their per capita income at independence. We fell further behind because we had nothing at all. So our lowest point was the late 80s, early 90s, when we became something like 1/6 of East Asia. Now we are catching up. We are 1/3 of East Asia. And I think it will take us another 10 years to go back to half of East Asia. It's been a remarkable journey. And we are moving again. Now, even as a quote, he actually Lenin ka quote hai, that centuries or decades nothing happens, and in weeks in which centuries fly by. Iska aur ek pehlu hai. there are two types of time periods like this. When nothing happens, and फटाक से बहुत कुछ होता है. So I was fortunate to live through one of them, which was May, June, July 91. Ironically, that's when my parents migrated from the country. But I could figure out real time that what TV Narasimha Rao had. I was 15 then, but I could figure out real time that what they were doing was remarkable. I couldn't understand the details of the new economic policy, but as you said in chapter 3 of the book, it was an unforgettable summer because even बच्चे को समझ आता था Times of India पढ़ के कि जो हो रहा है कमाल का हो रहा है. ठीक है, that's one type of decades nothing happens and then in weeks centuries fly by. But there's another type which is even more interesting.
Lots happens, but it's not obvious real time कि lots हुआ है. Right? It's not obvious real time कि lots हुआ है. ठीक है, so ये बहुत मेरे को interesting लगता है. Lots happens, right? So, for example, in this book I've referenced one such. In the forward of the book, Nandita now highlighted something called the Plaza Accord. Right? So Plaza Accord was done very cleverly by America. So by the early 80s, Japan was leaving America behind. Right? So Toyota, Sony, Panasonic, Honda, they were efficient, they were high tech, they were cheaper than the Americans, better quality than the Americans. The Americans didn't know what to do. Right? Remember, America provided Japan its security blanket. As per the peace treaty signed after World War II, Japan का सारा security America provide करता है. So the Americans did something which real time wasn't apparent how powerful it was. So September 85, they took the finance ministers of the G7 economies into a hotel in New York called the Plaza Hotel. They put everybody in a room and made them sign something called the Plaza Accord. So superficially, Britain, Germany, Japan, सब जन sign कर रहे हैं. But the real purpose, it became clear, was to get the yen revalued. So within 1 year, 12 महीने के अंदर yen was up 60-70%. Over the next 4 years, the yen was up 80-90%. By getting the Japanese to revalue their currency, they destroyed the comparative advantage of the Japanese. Right? That was basically America Inc. coerced Japan into revaluing its currency up so that the Japanese company's comparative advantage was neutralized. Right? The result was 3 decades of zero GDP growth. Right? 3 decades of zero GDP growth. Now, real time, the signing of the Plaza Accord was a inflection point in Japan's evolution, but real time, it wasn't apparent. I would submit to you, we're living through a similar period in India. I think the last 6 months have been incredibly important, and I think the next 3-4 months are going to be incredibly important, right? And therefore, I think whatever you see, whatever we are seeing, just think deeply about what's happening, because I think we're living through an incredibly important juncture in Indian history. I would submit to you that the last 6 months, the next 3 months are potentially more important than much of what's transpired in the last decade. Right? It's an incredibly important juncture in Indian history. And I think a big part of what transpires in the next 10 years will be decided in the next few months.
So why would you say it's very important for the next 3 months? What are some of the trends you're seeing? What is something that will happen?
So again, when you get to these inflection points, right, it's the lack of trends which itself become very interesting. So I gave you that the very strange data on elevated levels of demat accounts, elevated levels of stock market flows, weakness in banking system deposits, flat volume growth in FMCG, decline in passenger vehicle sales, right? The rapid ascent of a economic elite, right? So बहुत कुछ हो रहा है which is not stacking up. But I've always found that that's when inflection points come. When you get discordant data, see जब data click together करता है तब जोड़ के creating a trend isn't very hard. It's when you get discordant data, for example, $75 billion of inflows into mutual funds in a year, but struggle on bank deposits, गाड़ी नहीं बिक रही, private capex नहीं हो रहा, लेकिन लोग stock market में बेताशा पैसे डाल रहे हैं. That's a very interesting inflection point, right? So that's why the data suggests we're at a very interesting juncture. We could go up or down, but I think whichever way we go, I think opportunity is knocking on the doors of those of us who have the appetite for risk and who have the appetite to think originally, right? So I think India में think originally करना बहुत useful होता है because the set of circumstances our country is going through, no other country became a democracy before it became at least a second world country. कोई और देश ने universal adult suffrage नहीं किया. We're the first country in the history of the planet to do universal adult suffrage while being dirt poor. So that creates peculiar circumstances which have no precedence in human history, which is why thinking first principles and saying, यार हो क्या रहा है यहाँ पे, मैं सोचता हूँ opportunity कहाँ पे बनेगी सोचता हूँ. And remember, it's not going to be pretty, right? The thing about free market democracies, both India and the United States, is it's very effective. It's the best system going in the planet. But it's not pretty. So again, in chapter 4 of the book, Nandita put together a lovely table where she did decadal returns from the world's big stock markets. Dollar returns, okay? Decadal dollar total shareholder returns. And when she first produced it, all of us in the office were stunned because she showed that the only large stock markets in the world which have given double-digit dollar returns over the last 10 and 20 years are the United States and India. Right? Japan ने नहीं किया है, Germany ने किया है, Australia ने किया है, Taiwan ने किया है. Taiwan is one company, right? To be fair, Taiwan is one company, TSMC, and I would submit to you that one company is as much offshoot of the US economy. Apple का बड़ा सारा phone, सारे chips Apple के TSMC बनाता है, rather than an independent. So leaving aside Taiwan, right? India and America. Why are India and America the only two markets which give you double-digit dollar compounding decade after decade? Well, this surprises our American relatives more than it surprises, I think, most of us in India. Right? The reason I think is political contestability. If you want to be successful in the long run, thus 20 साल, you need political contestability, so that कोई अगर Xi की तरह पंगा ले, the electorate votes a Xi out. Right? Secondly, you need free market contestability. If a company is distorting the economy, if a company is delivering suboptimal outcomes, the free market needs to be able to compete those companies out of the picture. Korea or Japan haven't built that economy. Korea और जापान में अभी भी कुछ गिने चुने कंपनीज का बलबूता का माइंड ज़्यादा है. America has created the system. India has created. Now this system is not pretty because यहाँ पे churn relentless है, right? Competition mad है, बिल्कुल mad competition है. Yesterday we were in Delhi, वो विधानसभा polls का campaigning चालू हो गया, right? You know, it's in February. अभी से वो लोग लड़ मर रहे हैं. February में कौन जीतेगा, right? They're shutting down streets and doing नाराबाजी. Obviously यहाँ पे because this is a financial center, it's more muted. But this is also going to be a ferocious election. फिर यहाँ पे वहाँ बॉम्बे में विधानसभा खत्म होगा, फिर local assembly शुरू हो जाएगी, local corporation भी शुरू हो जाएगी, right? Because it's a highly competitive system, it's not pretty, but it's very effective. Because it means that if you are able to stay at the top, whether it's in corporate life or in economic life, if you're able to stay at the top for an extended period of time, you have to be a supreme exponent of whatever you're doing. And uska natija hai, the simplest measure is long-term stock market outcomes, right? So just as living in Mumbai, I whined about the traffic when we came in, right? Similarly, if you go to New York, right, it's not pretty, right? 2-3 लोग weed smoke कर रहे होंगे, right? गड्ढा होगा सड़क पे, 4 homeless लोग लेटे होंगे, they'll be shooting themselves up. San Francisco is even worse. But San Francisco, New York deliver, right? It's not pretty to visit San Francisco, New York, but they are economic dynamos par excellence, right? So it's very interesting, right? The places which are nice holiday destinations, वहाँ पे पैसे नहीं बनते, right? और जब places जहाँ पे पैसे बनते हैं, वहाँ पे holiday नहीं करने का है, right? So the way I look at it is, दुनिया में 2 ही देश में कमाना है तो 2 ही देश में रहना है, United States and India. Nandita has shown in the book, 2/3 of the world's stock market wealth comes from these 2 countries. कमाना है तो United States and India, और rest of the world में holiday कर सकते हैं हम लोग.
That's a very good way of saying this. And you said that you've traveled like across various cities, and of course, like we know from your answer that you've spent a lot of time traveling, learning from various places. I also heard that you mentioned you've traveled 200 cities in 1 year. How are your conversations different between like traveling across these cities, especially like in, let's say, northern part of India, southern part of India? How are these conversations different?
So I think a woman might feel this more keenly than a man might. So I'll request Nandita to opine on this subject first.
Yeah. So I mean, there is
I mean, the conversations are so distinct. I can't even begin to explain how distinct they are. Whenever we are in the north, most of the conversation is around आइए बैठिए ये खाइए वो खाइए. They'll just spend so much time into all of that. It's good. I'm not saying it's bad. We get really good food to eat there. But apart from that, when you try to talk to them about a lot of these cerebral things, or you try to talk to them about what's going on in the country, most of the people honestly do not have any idea. They're into their own bubble. Versus when we go to South India, the people are much smarter, clued up, they know how to speak, and even though there's a language barrier, generally because a lot of people do not speak Hindi, English is also a little broken, but the sense, the level of clarity that they have, the clarity of thought, the clarity of everything that they're doing, it's just outstanding, and it shows in the numbers. I mean, if you look at the GDP data, and we've talked about this in the book as well, if you look at the per capita income data for southern states or peninsular states, including Maharashtra and Goa, versus the rest of the country, the gap between their per capita income, average per capita income, has only widened over the last 10 years. One could assume that it's a little less developed, so it would catch up or grow faster, but that's not been the case, unfortunately. The gap was 35%, so southern or peninsular states had on an average 35% more per capita income 10 years ago. However, right now, as of 2023, that gap has widened to more than 50%.
So I think दो चीजें हुई हैं, and we can only explain one of the two, right? And the other aspects. So let's first look at outcomes. The outcomes, I think everybody will be familiar, right? Not just the economic outcomes, the social outcomes in South India are also on a different planet. So deaths, child mortality में deaths, female literacy, crime rates, murder rates, unemployment, infrastructure, hospital beds for every 1,000 people, right? All of these indicators, South India is a million miles ahead of the North, right? So the really interesting question is, why is this happening, right? Why is the gap actually growing bigger? Remember, the way our tax system works, the richer the state, the more the state contributes to the exchequer. So the southern states, although they account for only a quarter of the population, the southern states account for a quarter of the population because they account for half the GDP. The southern states give half of India's tax revenues, and the center then transfers those tax revenues to the northern states, right? So north को relentless fiscal stimulus मिल रहा है हर साल, south के लोग north को fiscal transfer दे रहे हैं. So you would assume over time the gap would compress, right? North को पैसे दिए जा रहे हैं, but gap compress नहीं हो रहा है. Right, as Nandita is saying, the GDP data, not just the GDP data, even the social outcomes data is widening, right? There's a hard-hitting book called North versus South, which we have quoted from in the book. The southern gentleman called Nilakantan has written a hard-hitting book on North versus South, and he's detailed beautifully how on a range of metrics the gap between North and South is widening. Now, सवाल ये खड़ा होता है कि क्यों हो रहा है? Why is the North actually falling further and further behind, even though the South is giving the North more and more tax dollars every year, right? So हमने किताब में जो लिखा है, and you're welcome to disagree, and please disagree here, please disagree on social media. I don't mind, because we can only hypothesize, and I think it's very important there's a debate on this, right? हमारा ख्याल से क्या हुआ है कि caste has played a very different role in North versus South. So in personal life, naturally in all parts of India, caste plays a important role. But basis whatever I've seen as a businessman, when I do business in South India, my caste is not a central aspect of my business interactions. So when I talk to a group of investors like this in South India, the room will have all sorts of people, all religions, all castes, right? And when the discussion ends and we break for snacks or coffee, I'll see many of these guys across religion, across caste, are friends, school friends, college friends, etc. Right? So you go to a city like Coimbatore or Madurai or Tiruchirappalli, you'll see that from a business perspective, it's a high trust environment. But if I do the same thing in Lucknow or Jaipur, it's highly likely that the bulk of the people in the room will be from one caste, right? And it will be very rare in that room to find people from a variety of religions or a variety of castes, and it will be even rarer still to have business interactions which are across caste. So in the North, the same interplay of caste in business life has created for a low trust society, and there's plenty of research which shows that low trust societies have high transaction costs, Because low trust society में मैं आपके साथ business कैसे करूँ, आप तो दूसरे कास्ट के हो, so I need 20 contracts, I need तसल्ली, escrow account, guarantee, right? I'm creating transaction costs with jam economic growth, right? So that's our thesis, right? Now other people will have other points of view on it, but it's an important topic because 2026, right, and 2026 delimitation comes into picture. So 71 में Indira Gandhi kicked the can down the road to 2001. Vajpayee Saab kicked the can down the road to 2026. So 2026, as per whatever census gets done between now and then, so we'll have to have a census next year again, delimitation 2026 में करना है. My reckoning is, so at the moment, the South has 1/3 of the seats in Parliament because the current seats in Parliament is as per the 71 census. So South population stopped growing 25 साल पहले.
Yeah, 2000.
Yeah, so South का population stopped growing 25 साल पहले. North का population still bounding along, right? So if you look at the data on reproduction, the poorest states in the country have the most kids. So in the 26 delimited, in the next census, South will only have a quarter of the population, right? Perhaps even less. Remember, our census understanding is as per the 2011 census.
So that actually the parliamentary seat allocation is done according to 1971 census, not even 2000.
So अभी का 71 के मुताबिक है. So we'll have a census hopefully next year. Basis which in 26 the seats will be reallocated again. So South will say we are growing the fastest. We have done the best job on social indicators, on population control. We are contributing half of the exchequer का revenue. और आप हमारे पार्लियामेंट में सीट्स 1/3 से quarter कर दोगे. Right? And yesterday we were in Delhi, somebody who knew this was going to happen, he said, अब तो 2020 में उड़ा देंगे सबको because it will swing in our favor. Right? Because naturally if you make the non-South 75, then parties who are from the non-South, they benefit, right? So it's a big deal. And so that's one of the reasons why I think the next few months will be utterly critical for I think the next 10 years. So बहुत नाजुक जंक्शन पे हम लोग, बहुत कुछ होने वाला है अगले कुछ महीने. आई थिंक रात को चैन की नींद आना शायद डिफिकल्ट हो जाए. हाई वोल्टेज साल रहेगा 2026.
Can you throw some light on how your conversations are different with South Indian taxi drivers versus?
So वहाँ पे it's all, honestly they'll have two newspapers. You will see seat के साइड में होगा vernacular और English. And you talk to him. So let me put it another way. So I was having a chat with a Marathi colleague of mine. He's a hardcore Maharashtra ka, good guy, right? Chartered accountant, पढ़ा लिखा इंसान, someone you know well, right? So Kushal's friend actually, one of my colleagues. So he was telling me that मैं जब 2 साल पहले पहली बार दिल्ली गया काम पे, टैक्सी में बैठा, I was thinking, why is this taxi driver being so nasty to me? Then he said, I realized this is how it is in North India. Right? So I told him ulta. I said, look, I grew up in Delhi. So when I went to South for the first time, I said, ये taxi driver इतनी शराफत से मुझसे बात कर रहा है, जरूर must be valued customer. Then I realized South में सब जन शराफत से ही बात करते हैं, right? So the body language, the content of the discussion, his education level, his income levels. I think South Indian taxi drivers earn at least 2x that of what North Indian taxi drivers earn. His clothes, as we were discussing, right? North Indian taxi drivers, for some reason, they don't like to shave, right? South Indian taxi driver shave करके आएगा, right? And he'll discuss with you उसके children के career, and it's incredible to listen to them. Their kids will be working in Infosys. The IT services companies, or they have joined the Indian Army as an officer, right? So it's stunning, right? North में taxi driver will say that just to become a taxi driver in the North, because remember labor market is very tight in South India. Labor is in short supply, right? Population stopped growing 25 years ago, so naturally for blue collar jobs the labor market is very tight, which is why blue collar incomes in South India are 2x out of the North, right? And as a result, if the fellow is earning more, he can educate his kids better, which is why his kids end up working in Infosys or HDFC Bank. North में, there is such an oversupply of labor, just to become a taxi driver itself is an achievement. Right? इसके बहुत सारे पहलू हैं. Right? These guys are one of the reasons they're achievers. They just work insane hours in the North. Right? So number of times we had to. In fact, we lost a colleague 10 years ago, incredibly bright guy. We lost a colleague. He'd taken an early morning taxi ride from Noida to the airport. The taxi driver had been working 24 hours flat out, and he fell asleep. And the taxi banged into the divider, and a truck slammed the cab from behind. And we lost a colleague. Right now, the result, that was the result of a labor market which simply doesn't have opportunity, which crushes people's income, which makes people work insane hours. Right? And one of the outcomes was that the taxi driver lost his tongue in that accident, our colleague lost his life in that accident. Right? South mein nahi dekha hai. South mein taxi driver will go home. In North, I'm so petrified when we do long haul journeys in the North. मैं आंखें फाड़ के खोलता रहता हूँ, मैं बात करता रहता हूँ. Right? Because I know that those guys have to work insane hours. Right? So income levels, quality of life, how much they can read, how much time they have to read, how much they can educate their kids, what their perspective on life is, vastly different.
Yeah, I remember in Mumbai, even I was talking to one of the taxi drivers, and I have noticed one thing, that most of them have now started consuming a lot of content. And one of them asked me, भैया आप कोई स्टॉक रेकमेंड करोगे क्या? आपका कॉल सुना कि आप स्टॉक्स वगैरह में कुछ इन्वेस्ट करते हो, एंड हमको भी बताओ कोई म्यूचुअल फंड है क्या? And I was surprised that these they are asking about stocks, mutual funds, investing, and I was surprised in a good way that this is a shift which is happening. I don't know if it's across.
So let's just take it a step further. A colleague of mine, we were in a taxi ride a month ago, and taxi driver के left पे laptop था. As he was driving, he was doing F&O trading. तो हम पूछे कि आपको टेंशन नहीं होता, लेकिन कमाई तो उसी में है, टैक्सी ड्राइव में कौन से पैसे मिलते हैं? So he said, ये तो मैं चलाता हूँ जिससे मैं घर में बैठे he admitted he was addicted to F&O trading, and he said, ये टैक्सी चलाता हूँ जिससे my addiction doesn't get out of hand. It's just पैसा तो स्क्रीन पे ही बन रहा है, आपको आगे कौन से पैसे बन रहे हैं? Insane, right? F&O trading while driving a cab in Bombay.
Yeah, that's next level crazy. I want to touch upon an important aspect which has been mentioned very beautifully in your book, Rise of India's Women. And you state that there are 15.7 million women-run enterprises in India, which is around 22% of the overall entrepreneurial landscape. Also, the literacy rate amongst women is growing at a higher rate than men, which is mentioned in your book. And the GPI, which is the Gender Parity Index, is more than 1 amongst all the school age groups, which means that at every school age group, there are more number of girls who are enrolled versus boys. How will all these stats contribute to the rise of Indian economy, and are there any other stats which you think are helping the growth of the India story?
So again, the woman wala story is one of the most remarkable stories, I think, in modern India. Had a decade ago, you and I met, and you had told me everything that's happened to women in the last 10 years, I wouldn't have believed you, right? But thankfully, Nandita's pulled the data out, so we can narrate the data to you, and then we can try to think through क्या हुआ है. So it's worth starting with the data. Nandita, data share कर दीजिए, फिर समझते हैं क्या हुआ है.
Yeah. So there are 3 sets of things that we've observed. The first thing that was very much common, and I think all of us, at least when I was in school, I used to keep hearing on this, and then I looked at the data as well, that women generally tend to do better. They have better outcomes when it comes to schooling, education, otherwise. Obviously, 10th and 12th pass rates are much higher for women, I think going back 10, 15 years ago as well. So we just looked at this data from Government of India, which they published for higher secondary education as well as university education. So when we looked at it, it was quite surprising, because 2018 onwards, when this survey started, until 2022-23, when the data was published, until then, we saw that at all levels of education, it's not just at primary or secondary level, but even at the higher secondary and university level, more women were getting enrolled into educational institutes, had better outcomes. Furthermore, not only that, women from the lower or backward castes were doing much better than general women. That was also visible in the data, which was quite surprising. So we said, okay, this is one thing which is going on. Let's have a look at the labor force participation rate, the most contested data point actually in the country and all over the world. When I looked at the LFPR, obviously that was going down for some time, and it was not just at a low level, the trend was going down, which is a quite worrying thing. So I said, okay, let me have a look at this data from a different way. So then I looked at it from age buckets wise. So for example, the LFPR or FLFPR, female labor force participation rate for the age group 15 to 24, 25 to 30, 30 and onwards, and such on, so on and so forth. The buckets were like that. Interestingly, the maximum fall in the FLFPR in the last 10 years until 2019 was in the 15 to 24 category. Now, if you put 1 and 2 together, the education bit and the FLFPR, it makes sense, right? It should go down. 15 to 24 is the age when children go to school, university, get educated, and naturally they are out of the labor force. Given that our country is mostly young, our median age is 28, this is a very, it should be going down. If it's going up, then it's a problem, if you look at it that way. 30 and onwards, the FLFPR was actually rising. So this is very optical. As most of the population comes out of that education and into the workforce, we will see it rising. And indeed, the PLFS data, latest PLFS data shows that is already coming close to 40. It's 37.2, and it will go on to 50.
So this debate, I think, is incredibly important, right? So this debate has two sides. One side is saying that in India, women have been given a raw deal. They're not participating in labor force. Because country ka future dark hai, because we are not using half the population, right? That's the kind of negative side. Our read of the data is that because women are studying in ever larger numbers, right? In school, college, university, more women studying than men with better pass rates. Our reading is if you adjust for that, female labor force participation rate is rising. Now, this is a big deal because if Nandita's prognosis, if our prognosis in chapter 5 of this book is right, and women are coming into the labor force in ever larger numbers, right? So a decade ago, FLFPR was 25?
Yeah, less than that.
So now it's pushing 37. If a decade hence it pushes 50, naturally if you bring in half the labor force into the economy, you get an economic growth fillip, right? Aapka unproductive resource, productive ho raha hai, right? But that's our view. We are being opposed by a whole industry which is saying, सब कुछ अंधकार है, कोई यहाँ पे hope की गुंजाइश ही नहीं है, right? We are strongly contesting that. Now, one of the reasons we are strongly contesting it is, we are saying in the book that the RBI data is very clear. The RBI data shows that in the last few years, for the first time in Indian history, in the last few years, in urban and metropolitan areas, women have more money in their accounts than men. In fact, even on the mutual fund data, the number of new women sign-ups are increasing, are higher than the number of male sign-ups, right? So the andhkar wala side is saying कि boss ये इसलिए है कि the man is giving the woman the money for tax reasons, right? इसलिए the woman's account. So our point is that was the case, that should have been the case 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Why is it that the data is showing this new surge in female deposits and female MF participation, right? So again, even in India with data as well, you can have a fight, right? So here the data is clearly showing that women's financial state is better than it was 10 years ago. But the andhkar wala side is saying that's because the man is giving his money and saving in the woman's name, कोई tax break मिलेगा उसको, ठीक है?
Another argument is that there are less number of accounts for women. That's why the average deposit ticket size is.
That was the argument. The andhkar wala side is saying account शायद कम होंगे. Go on.
Yeah, and then we looked at the data for number of accounts as well, which is given by World Bank, and they have it only until 2021. But according to that data, women have more number of bank accounts also.
Now, if you believe the andhkar wala side, वो man ने खुलवाया होगा accounts, women से जबरदस्ती कुछ tax saving के वास्ते, right? Now, jokes apart. You have to make up your mind. We have to make up our mind. हम stock market वाले दिमाग लगा के पैसा कमाना है, right? Our read is this is what's happened. Data education का साफ है, right? Thankfully, andhkar wala side hasn't said that the man is writing the exam for the woman, right? वो भी हो सकता है, एक साल बाद वो भी आ जाए. The education outcomes data is clear. The financial outcomes data is there, and it's up to us to interpret it. We think the missing link is jobs. Jobs पे definitive data नहीं है, but the structure of the Indian economy is open for all of us to interpret. 65% of GDP is services. Right, so media, financial services, hospitality, where brawn has no role, right? Muscle का कोई role तो है नहीं. अगर आपकी प्रोटीन मिल्कशेक ज़्यादा पी के आपकी कंपाउंडिंग ज़्यादा नहीं आएगी, right? So muscle का role नहीं है in services. Whatever manufacturing is 15% of GDP. The bulk of our manufacturing is capital light, knowledge intensive manufacturing. Pharmaceuticals, the iPhone, for example, right? iPhone factories are 90% women. So even in our manufacturing, muscle has no role to play. So the structure of the Indian economy is unique for a poor country. For a poor country, we have an economy where muscle plays almost no role. Knowledge and education plays a great role. Knowledge and education of women are blasting it out of the park. And our thesis is, and this is the piece where there's no data, hence the thesis. Our thesis is the best jobs in India today are going to women, which is why their financial outcomes are better. Now there's another facet to it, right? Remember Kushal referenced women self-employed entrepreneurs, right? So now there's a range of data to suggest that over the last 4 years, 40% of startups are coming from women. And Nandita did a brilliant bit of research in the book where she showed 3 very interesting things. She showed firstly that the default data from Indian banks shows, default data, NPA data shows women cut default rates up. Women SME owners have half the default rate of male SME owners. Then she went and got global data which shows women make better startup entrepreneurs than men do. So US ka data here. And the third piece is she collated a lot of interviews which showed that the rise of the India stack. So UPI, Jandhan, Aadhaar, Mobile, UPI, it's enormously liberating for women because in a conservative country, what the India stack, JAM plus India stack, JAM plus UPI, is allowing women to earn an income, build a business, earn an income without stepping out of the house. So whether you're selling achar, papad, cake, salad, whatever it is, you are now free to do a Misho type, free to build a Misho type economy, which doesn't involve breaking social norms, but yet you can build a very viable life for yourself using UPI, free transactions, mobile data, mobile broadband, basically free, and the ability to connect with other women. And you're therefore creating an economy where women are selling to women and building a self-employment ecosystem which simply didn't exist, and the infrastructure didn't exist for it a decade ago.
I think this is very powerful because at the front end and the back end of that business that women are running, everything is tech enabled right now. So if you look at it, the infrastructure to get payment from, for example, people who are giving you the raw materials, whatever you're making, the working capital cycle gets reduced because of UPI, because of instant transactions. That's the back end. That's how the business is actually done. On the front end, reaching out to customers, reaching out to the right people, marketing your product or service, whatever it is that you're selling, that has also become incredibly easy because of the internet. So both at the back end as well as the front end, there's a lot of tech-enabled systems which basically, as Saurabh said, doesn't require the woman to step out of the house, and she can build a business just sitting from the comfort of her home and sell products and services pan-India.
So we're going to do another layer of work on this, right? Because we made a lot of money on this in the last 2 years, और कमाने की इच्छा है. And our hypothesis is that if we go to small tier 2, tier 3 cities, in many of those tier 2, tier 3 cities, women now have 2x, 3x the bank balance of men because of this. ये जो नया ecosystem बन रहा है, right? And if that's the case, right, ये काम करके निकालना है, is it the case that in tier 2, tier 3 cities, women have 2x, 3x? Naturally, it predisposes us to a set of investment opportunities which are centric on small town India and women, right? And this is why this sort of research is actually very useful. नहीं तो फाड़ के EPS growth देख के और annual report पढ़ के जिंदगी चला लेते, right? सब भाग के सब करने की जरूरत क्या थी? Because if you want to spot where the country is changing, it's not going to show up in the annual report. The annual report will show up with a lag. The annual reports of companies catering to India's women will show with a lag the change that we're discussing. And it's at the point where the data is disputed, जहाँ पे झगड़ा होता है डेटा पे, तब सबसे useful है डेटा पे focus करना. And that's why we actually quite enjoy writing these books and 20 people shouting at us, because उसी पे समझ आता है कि यहाँ पे पैसा बन सकता है. जहाँ पे consensus है वहाँ पे पैसा नहीं बनेगा. जहाँ पे back to again our point, जहाँ पे holiday destination है वहाँ पैसा नहीं बनेगा, वहाँ पे रिलैक्स करने का है. जहाँ पे शोर हो रहा है, चिल्ला रहे हैं लोग, that's where the money is going to be.
You also mentioned one interesting data point that women are better capital allocators than men, right? Do you want to throw some light on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is BCG data that we looked at. So, the BCG did this, I think, across North America. They looked at data from all the startups which are run by men and women. So, they disaggregated that data by gender. And what they found was that women, on an average, get lesser, funding, lesser opportunities to get funding on an average. So, these are the startups which are just run by women. So there is no man who's in the founder or co-founder range over there. On the other hand, men get a lot of funding on an average, or at least a startup which has one man as the founder or co-founder. It can be the other one can be a woman, but in general, that's the case. However, when you look at the profit and the revenue data from the same study that they did, women on an average are earning more revenue for whatever funding that they get, and in general also, absolute terms, women are earning higher revenues and higher profits. So this was one thing that we saw. It was at the US level, and then when you come back to India and you try to talk to people, and when we obviously travel across the country and we speak with these women, they are very clear on what they want to do. That sort of clarity, that sense of clarity is very important when you're running a business. I mean, obviously you need to know the specifics of your business, everything across as well, and you need to understand your target consumer. All of these things come into play. However, having that sense of clarity is what really makes you a great capital allocator.
So I'll make it a little more kadwa for the man, okay? And I'm almost talking to myself here. So
One man left, by the way.
So Warren Buffett ji has spoken about internal scorecard, right? Warren Buffett ji has said the investor should focus on the internal scorecard. Bahar ka scorecard baad mein jaye. Don't try to show off. Now, if you think about it, right? It's very difficult for the man to do. And I think this is because of evolution. So whenever we were in the jungle, in the bush, right, the man would try to kill the biggest deer and go back to the cave and say, "Dekho, Kushal ne wo wala deer mara, lekin maine usse bada deer mara hai." Okay? And then when we left the bush, we said pyramids. Kushal ki pyramid itni badi, meri pyramid usse bhi badi. Okay? And then we moved into flats in Bombay and cars and so on. And stock market mein, Meri IRR, Kushal ki IRR, right? So courtesy Darwinian evolutionary forces, not our fault. Courtesy Darwinian evolutionary forces, we are geared to focus on the external scorecard. और वहाँ पे वॉरेन बफेट जी बोल रहे हैं आप internal scorecard पे करो. For reasons, I wish I was a sociologist or a gene scientist, women are able to focus on the internal scorecard far better than men can. Right? अब वो किस लिए है आप थोड़ा गौर कीजिए. If you're a woman, it's perhaps obvious to you, but I keep thinking about this now, that why are women able to focus on the internal scorecard, which Warren Buffett rightly says is what an investor should focus. 5 लोग क्या बोल रहे हैं आपको कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ना चाहिए, right? You should focus on it. It's bloody hard to do as a man, right? कुशल और मेरा इस मुद्दे पे काफी discussion हो चुका है, but it's I think easier for women to do, and I think it's playing out in Indian women's favor. They're building these businesses quietly. Because they're building these businesses quietly, the mainstream discourse hasn't yet clocked on to the fact that you're seeing this rapid ascendancy, right? And again, if you think about it, right, why are women building this quietly? Firstly, it might make the man in the family feel insecure कि तू मुझसे कम कमाता है. Secondly, it might make society say, अरे ये तो ज़्यादा कमा रही है, क्या कर रही है ये, right? And thirdly, in India, do you really want to draw attention to yourself, right? Back to our book, Unusual Billionaires, the best compounders in the country, the best compounders in the country are the CEOs who are completely unknown. जहाँ पे भी आपके कंपनी को CEO की खबर है, वहाँ पे compounding कमजोर होती है. The companies who make headlines, don't make returns. The companies who make returns don't make headlines. तो अब उसको अब gender के तौर पे भी मेरे ख्याल से you can apply the same construct to gender, and I think super interesting subject. Enormous money at play here. South versus North, new elite versus Purana elite, and women versus men.
I think so. This has always existed. I think sociologically we'll have to do more research. But what has happened in the last 10 years? So you might ask, why now? Why not 10 years ago? Why not 20 years ago? What has happened in the last 10 years is a remarkable set of changes, and which we also talk about in the book and Saurabh mentioned. So Jam Trinity, we have Equalizer. So basically women and men got the same platform. And if you have the same platform, from there on, it's only your perseverance, the kind of things that you want to do, sense of clarity, all of these things will really push you towards success. So I think that equalizer was very important.
If you want to be more optimistic on India, or एक factoid किताब से, SC/ST women, their educational achievement has rocketed the fastest in the last 20 years. So even more than privileged caste women, oppressed caste women, the line's almost vertical, their educational attainment. And that dimension also is very interesting, right? Again, ज़्यादा discussion नहीं होते इस मुद्दे पे, right? So again, back to the same, the stuff in India which is discussed the least, the changes in the country which are discussed the least, are often the most powerful changes from which we can profit as investors.
Awesome. This is super interesting. In the interest of time, last question to you, Saurabh, which is a tricky one. If you were the Prime Minister of India, what are some 3 changes you would like to do in the Indian economy?
So I think I have no desire to answer such tricky questions. I just give a couple of observations that we keep making to those people in our power. जब कोई पूछता है हमको या अखबार में आर्टिकल लिखने बोलता है, and it links to the stock market. The fact that if I let me use my own example, right? So we have some cash on Marcellus's balance sheet. If I invest that as the guy running Marcellus, if I invest that money, we will pay a corporate tax rate of 25%. Okay? So we do capex, set up a new office somewhere in the country, we set up a new business, we'll pay 25%. Now, if the money stays inside Marcellus, I can't monetize it. If I then pay myself a dividend to take the profits out, dividend will be tax padega, right? And the math suggests to me that whatever money I make from investing afresh, आधा taxman को निकल जाएगा, right? Now, if I say, let's take Marcellus's balance sheet and punt it in the stock market, right? You can do that, no? हमारे balance sheet का पैसा है. So LTCGT is 12.5, right? Just put yourself in my shoes, right? As it is, जैसे 7 किताबें लिखी कुशल ने बोला है, I've got 2 young kids, I've only got so many hours in the day. If I'm going to set up a new business and pay 25% corporate tax rate versus 12.5% LTCGT in the stock market, which of the two will I do? Right? And I think that gives us a clue as to why we are seeing insane flows into the stock market and weak private capex. I think people at the highest levels, if they can have a think about what could be done here, because we're too poor a country to have such weak levels of capex and such high stock market participation. And I refuse to believe that you can have a 25% tax rate on corporates and 12.5% on LTCGT, and you can't. It's irrational to expect people not to arbitrage that, right? I think the second piece we are deeply concerned about, जिनको सुनना है सुन सकते हैं, जिनको हम बोल पाते हैं बोलते हैं. We think AI is going to lead to a crisis in our country, right? So speaking to many of our investing companies, it's relatively clear that they're gonna stop hiring effectively in many roles because AI is going to do that. And speaking to people who are at the cutting edge of AI, it sounds as if for a given set of tasks, AI can do it with 70, 80, 90% less people. Right? So this time around, we're not talking about the taxi driver ecosystem, we're talking about Hamara ecosystem. And I think those of you who've kept up with what happened in this year's recruitment round in universities and the engineering colleges, I'm sure you heard what happened in this year's recruitment round. My fear is that's a precursor of things to come. Naturally, there will be a recruitment cycle, but structurally, AI potentially wipes out a big part of the job ecosystem that had been born in the last 30 years or so. Courtesy, IT services ka boom, financial services ka boom, because all of that work can now be done with far fewer people. And I think it merits a policy response. Then at the highest levels of our country, I hope there are people working on how to turn AI into an opportunity for India and not a curse.
Awesome. So this was super insightful. Thank you so much both of you for your time. We'll open the floor for audience Q&A. If anyone has a question, kindly raise your hand and we'll ask someone to give the mic.
Hello.
Yes.
I'm Raj. I run a company called Invest in Pre-Leased, and you mentioned about how India's significant wealth lies in real estate. How do you see the small and medium REITs, which SEBI has now regulated, impacting the overall investment space?
So look, I mean, I'm not an expert on REITs, but I'm glad it's there, right? Because what it does is it takes an illiquid asset class. It takes an illiquid asset class with a sort of iffy reputation and makes it a liquid asset class with a more cleaner reputation. Where the forensic accountant in me worries is when I go through the accounts of the REITs, मेरे को चिंता होती है because I see conflict of interest written all over those accounts. So I think someone somewhere has to look at the governance of these people, these constructs, and it has to be. I think we have. If we are to ever invest in REITs assets, we need a degree of comfort that whoever is running the REIT can also gratify himself or herself through other means, right? वो वाला comfort मेरे को दिखता नहीं है when I read the accounts of these pieces, right? But I think it's a step in the right direction. We've taken a liquid asset class to heavy reputation and made it a liquid asset class with a slightly better reputation now.
Awesome. That was super insightful. Thank you so much, Saurabh. Thank you so much, Nandita, for doing this. And we had an amazing time. I'm pretty sure that the session was so exciting. Next time, if I want to organize this, black में tickets तो बिकनी चाहिए ये वाले event की. But thank you so much for doing this once again, ladies and gentlemen.
आई होप आपको वैल्यू मिली होगी ये वीडियो से. अगर आपको थोड़ी सी भी वैल्यू मिली होगी तो आई रिक्वेस्ट यू टू शेयर दिस वीडियो विद एटलीस्ट वन फ्रेंड यू नो सो दैट दे ऑल्सो कैन गेट अ लॉट ऑफ इनसाइट्स फ्रॉम दिस. एंड प्लीज लेट अस नो कि आपको कौन से पार्ट सबसे ज्यादा पसंद आए, आपको कौन से पार्ट बिल्कुल पसंद नहीं आए, एंड आपको कौन से टाइप के गेस्ट चाहिए, एंड व्हाट काइंड ऑफ क्वेश्चंस यू वांट अस टू आस्क ऑल दीज गेस्ट सो दैट वी गिव यू द मोस्ट पॉसिबल वैल्यू इन द शॉर्टेस्ट अमाउंट ऑफ टाइम. Thank you so much for watching this video. Do let us know in the comment section about the feedback for the same and stay tuned for more episodes of Conversation with Kushal.